The Blacksmith's Letter. Missouri, 1869. The rhythmic clang of hammer against anvil echoed through the small town of Oakville. Inside the forge, Laura Sullivan's strong arm brought the hammer down again, sending sparks flying as she shaped the red-hot horseshoe. Sweat beaded her brow despite the early spring chill, and she paused briefly to push a stray lock of chestnut hair back beneath her leather cap. "Miss Laura!" a voice called from the doorway. Laura looked up to see young Jimmy Potter, the postmaster's son, clutching an envelope in his hand. She recognized the handwriting. It was another letter from Spencer. "I have your mail, Miss Laura?" Jimmy approached cautiously, staying well back from the forge. "Pa says this one came all the way from California again." Laura placed her hammer down and wiped her hands on her leather apron. "Thank you, Jimmy." She reached for the letter, trying to hide her eagerness. "Pa says it ain't proper for a lady to be sweating over a forge like a man," Jimmy blurted, then immediately reddened. Laura waited patiently for him to finish. "And what does your ma say when she's churning butter or hauling water or delivering calves in the middle of the night?" Jimmy shuffled his feet. "She says work is work, and the good Lord gave us all with to do it." "Smart woman, your mother." Laura flipped him a penny. "Tell your pa thank you for bringing this by special." After Jimmy scampered off, Laura tucked the precious envelope into her pocket. Spencer's letters were private treasures, to be savored alone after the day's work was done. She'd been writing Spencer for a long time. 5 years of sharing dreams, thoughts, and growing affection with a man she'd met for just one day during the darkest times of the war. That evening, Laura sat by the fire in the small home attached to her blacksmith shop. Her father's old hound, Rusty, lay at her feet as she carefully opened Spencer's letter. "My dearest Laura, the California sun rises differently than in Missouri. It's more golden somehow, as if promising something new each day. As you know, I've been able to secure 10 acres with good water access, build a sturdy house, and establish myself with the local ranchers who need quality horses. Everything I've worked for over the past few years has been leading up to this moment. Laura, I find myself unable to wait any longer. These letters have been my greatest joy, but they are no longer enough. I want to wake up in the morning to see your face, not just imagine it as I read your words. I want to build a life, a real life, with the remarkable woman who has captured my heart through ink and paper. Will you marry me, Laura Sullivan? Will you come to California and make this house a home? I have enclosed money for your passage, though I know your pride may resist it. Please consider it an investment in our future happiness. With all my heart, Spencer." Laura trembled as she read the words again. Marriage, California, a new life away from the whispers and judgments of Oakville, where folks still couldn't accept a woman blacksmith, no matter how fine her work. She thought back to the day she'd met Spencer Hewitt. He'd ridden through with a Union regiment, his horse throwing a shoe just outside town. Her father had been still alive, but was weakened by the consumption that would claim him months later. He had been too ill to work. Laura, already skilled from years as his apprentice, had stepped in. Spencer had watched her work with respect rather than the usual skepticism she usually received from others. They talked for hours as she repaired not just his horse's shoe, but those of several other soldiers. He'd told her of his twin brother Matthew, of his farm in Missouri abandoned when the war came, and of his dreams to head west when the fighting ended. When he rode out the next morning, she'd been certain she'd never see him again. But a letter had arrived 6 months later. Her father had just died, leaving her the forge and a town full of men who refused to bring her their business. Spencer's letter had been a lifeline, a connection to someone who saw her as capable, as worthy. Now, 5 years later, she held a marriage proposal from a man she'd spent just one day with, yet who seemed to understand her better than anyone. Laura reached for paper and ink. "Yes," she wrote. "Yes, I will come." 2 months later, Laura stepped off the train in Sacramento, California, weary from the long journey but filled with nervous excitement. She'd sold the forge to Mr. Adams, the town's farrier, who'd finally acknowledged her skill after years of reluctance. The sale had brought enough for the journey and a small nest egg besides. She scanned the crowded platform, searching for the face she remembered. She looked for a man with a strong jaw, kind blue eyes, and sandy hair. She spotted a man who matched the description, but as he approached, something felt wrong. He looked like Spencer, yet there was something different about him. "Laura Sullivan?" he asked, removing his hat. Laura studied him. "Spencer?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "No, ma'am. I'm Matthew Hewitt, Spencer's brother." He cleared his throat. "Spencer sent me to collect you." Is he unwell? Laura asked, immediately concerned. He's at the ranch. He asked me to bring you there. Matthew reached for her trunk. The wagon's this way. As they rode through Sacramento and out into the countryside, Laura sensed Matthew's unease. He attempted at conversation but fell silent when she asked direct questions about Spencer. Mr. Hewitt, she finally said firmly, I've traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man I've been corresponding with for 5 years. I believe I deserve the courtesy of knowing why he couldn't meet me himself. Matthew's hands tightened on the reins. It's not my place to explain, Miss Sullivan. Then whose place is it? Laura demanded. Matthew sighed heavily. My brother. He's changed since you knew him. The war changed everyone, Laura replied. That's hardly a revelation. It's more than that. Matthew stared straight ahead. He wasn't sure you'd still want him if you saw... Well, he thought it might be easier if I came instead. A chill ran down Laura's spine. If you came instead? For what purpose, Mr. Hewitt? To escort me to the ranch or to replace your brother entirely? Matthew's silence was answer enough. Stop the wagon, Laura commanded. Which, Miss Sullivan? Stop the wagon now, or I'll jump down while it's moving. Matthew pulled the horses to a halt. Laura turned to face him fully. Tell me the truth, all of it, right now, she demanded. Matthew removed his hat. His hair was several shades darker than she remembered Spencer's to be. Looking more closely, she noticed other differences as well. He had a wider nose and a scar along his jawline. Spencer lost his right arm at Appomattox just days before the surrender, Matthew said quietly. The last battle of a pointless war, and he paid with his limb. He recovered physically, but something in him broke. He came west as planned, built the ranch, but he's convinced himself he's half a man. Matthew looked at her directly. When your acceptance came, he panicked. He thinks no woman wants a cripple for a husband, especially not a fine woman who'd waited 5 years. Laura felt rage building inside her, hot and fierce. So he sent you to what? Court me in his place? Marry me while pretending to be him? No, Matthew protested. At least, not at first. He just wanted me to explain in person, to let you down gently. But then he got this idea that maybe you wouldn't mind if it was me instead. We look enough alike, and he said you barely knew him anyway, just from letters. Stop, Laura said, her voice dangerously quiet. Take me to him, now. The Hewitt Ranch was impressive. There was a solid 2-story house, a large barn, and corrals filled with quality horses. As they approached, Laura saw a solitary figure by the corral, his left arm resting on the fence as he watched a young colt prance about. Even from behind, she recognized Spencer immediately. He stood straighter than his brother, and though they were twins, there was a dignity in his posture that Matthew lacked. Spencer, Matthew called as they neared. We have a visitor. Spencer turned, and Laura saw the empty right sleeve of his shirt neatly pinned up at the shoulder. His face, she had carried in her memory for 5 years, went pale with shock. Laura? His voice was exactly as she remembered, though rougher somehow. Laura climbed down from the wagon without assistance, ignoring Matthew's outstretched hand. She walked directly to Spencer, stopping a few feet away. You lied to me, she said simply. Spencer swallowed hard. What do you mean? You lied when you sent your brother to replace you, Laura countered. You assumed I was so shallow that I would reject you for losing an arm, so you decided to deceive me instead. I was trying to spare you disappointment, Spencer replied, his jaw tight. By insulting my character and my intelligence? Laura laughed bitterly. That's a strange way to show respect, Mr. Hewitt. You deserve a whole man, Spencer said quietly. Laura stepped closer, her eyes flashing. I deserve the man who wrote those letters. The man who saw me as more than just a woman trying to do a man's job. The man who understood the pride I took in my work and who never once suggested I should give up the forge and find a suitable occupation. She shook her head. But that man, it seems, doesn't actually exist. He wouldn't have treated me like this. Spencer flinched as if she'd struck him. The man who wrote those letters lost his arm and his worth on the same day. You lost your arm, not your mind or your heart, Laura snapped, and your worth was never in your limbs. She turned to Matthew. Is there a hotel in town? Yes, but... Take me there, please. I need to consider my options. Spencer stepped forward. Laura, please. You've come all this way. Yes, I have. I sold my father's forge, my livelihood, and my heritage. I've come to marry a man who respects me. I'm still looking for him. She climbed back into the wagon. Good day, Mr. Hewitt. The town of Maple Ridge was smaller than Laura had imagined, just a main street with the essential businesses. There was a general store, saloon, hotel, and a few other establishments. As Matthew escorted her to the modest hotel, Laura noticed a boarded-up building with a forged chimney. "Was that the blacksmith shop?" she asked. "Yes, old Ferguson died last winter. His heart gave out, and the town's been without a smith since then. Nearest one is 20 miles away." Laura's mind began turning as they approached the hotel. "Who owns the property now?" "His widow, I expect. She's been trying to sell, but there aren't many blacksmiths looking to settle in a small place like Maple Ridge." After securing a room, Laura made inquiries and found herself knocking on the door of a small cottage later that afternoon. Mrs. Ferguson, a plump woman in her 60s, greeted her warily. "I understand you're selling the blacksmith shop," Laura said after introducing herself. "It's for sale, yes, though what business that is of yours, I couldn't say," Mrs. Ferguson replied. "I'm a blacksmith," Laura stated. "I'd like to see the forge." Mrs. Ferguson's expression was one of confusion. "You're having a laugh." "No, ma'am. I ran my father's forge in Missouri for 5 years before coming west." Laura held out her hands, showing the calluses and burns that no lady's hands should bear. "I'm interested in purchasing your property if the price is fair." After a moment of stunned silence, Mrs. Ferguson shrugged. "Well, I never. But I suppose your money's as good as anyone's." She reached for her shawl. "Come along, then. Let's see if my Henry's shop meets your requirements." The forge was in surprisingly good condition. The old blacksmith had clearly been meticulous about his tools and equipment. The attached stable had 6 stalls, all empty now, but solidly built. The living quarters behind the shop were small, but comfortable enough for one person. "What's your asking price, Mrs. Ferguson?" Laura asked, already calculating the funds remaining from the sale of her father's forge. By sunset, Laura Sullivan was the new owner of Maple Ridge's blacksmith shop. She spent the night at the hotel, her mind racing with plans. She would show Spencer Hewitt exactly what he had lost with his deception. A woman who didn't care about missing limbs but had no tolerance for a missing backbone. Word spread quickly through the small community. By mid-morning the next day, curious townspeople were finding excuses to pass by the blacksmith shop, where Laura was already hard at work cleaning and organizing. Some stopped to stare openly at the woman in trousers and a leather apron. Others called greetings, their curiosity evident, but their manner friendly enough. Sheriff Brooks was more direct, striding into the shop. "Miss Sullivan, I'm Sheriff Brooks. Understand you've purchased Ferguson's place." Laura looked up from the forge she was rebuilding. "That's correct." The sheriff studied her. "Maple Ridge is a peaceful town, miss. We don't hold with troublemakers." "It's a good thing I'm a blacksmith and not a troublemaker, then," Laura replied evenly. "A female blacksmith is trouble enough," the sheriff countered. "Men won't take kindly to it." Laura straightened. "Sheriff, I've heard this speech before back in Missouri. Here's what will happen. At first, men will refuse to bring me business. Then someone desperate will try me. Maybe with a broken wagon wheel or a thrown horseshoe when the next smith is too far away. I'll do good work, and word will spread. Eventually, most men will decide they care more about quality ironwork than about what's under my apron. The rest can ride 20 miles to the next blacksmith if their pride means more to them than their convenience." The sheriff's mustache twitched. "You're mighty sure of yourself." "I'm sure of my skills," Laura corrected. "Now, unless you're here to welcome me to town or commission some ironwork, I have a forge to restore." After the sheriff left, Laura returned to her work, but her confident facade soon gave way to doubt. She'd acted impulsively, buying the shop to prove a point. Now she was committed to building a business in a strange town where she knew no one, except the man who had broken her heart before she even arrived. 3 days later, Laura's forge was operational. She posted a sign announcing the blacksmith shop would open for business the following morning. That evening, as she was banking the forge fire, the door to the shop swung open. Spencer Hewitt stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Matthew told me you bought Ferguson's place." "Yes, I did," Laura said curtly. "Why?" "Because I'm a blacksmith and the town needed one." She continued working, refusing to look at him. "And because I'm not planning on returning to Missouri." Spencer stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I came to apologize." "For which part?" Laura asked, finally meeting his gaze. "For sending your brother to deceive me? For believing I'm so shallow I'd reject you for a missing arm? Or for wasting 5 years of my life with letters from a man who doesn't actually exist?" "For all of it," Spencer said quietly. You're right. I insulted you with my assumptions. I was a coward. Laura set down her tools. Do you know what hurt the most, Spencer? Not that you lost an arm, not even that you couldn't meet me yourself. It was that you thought so little of me, of what we built through all of those letters, that you believed I could simply transfer my feelings to your brother as if you were interchangeable parts. Spencer winced. I wasn't thinking clearly. After Appomattox, after losing my arm, something broke in me. I've spent 4 years convincing myself I'm less than I was, that I couldn't be the man you deserved. He gestured to her forge, but here you are, proving me wrong already. You're willing to start over alone in a new place, just as capable and determined as the woman in the letters. I'm exactly who I've always been, Laura said. Are you? Spencer was silent for a moment. I don't know, he finally admitted. I hope to find out. He moved toward the door. I'll leave you to your work. Spencer, Laura called as he reached for the handle. The forge opens at dawn. I could use an assistant to work the bellows. She turned back to her tools. If you're interested? She didn't look up as the door opened and closed, leaving her alone with the cooling forge and the first tiny spark of something that felt like hope. To Laura's surprise, Spencer arrived before dawn the next morning. He said nothing as he removed his coat, simply nodding when she pointed to the bellows. Their first day working together was awkward, filled with minimal conversation. But Spencer proved adept at working the bellows one-handed, and he clearly knew his way around a forge. By midday, they'd received jobs from 3 customers: a farmer with a broken plow blade, a rancher needing horseshoes, and the general store owner who needed new hinges for his storeroom. As the days passed, they established a rhythm. Spencer would arrive at dawn and leave at dusk. They spoke mainly about the work, occasionally sharing a meal in silence. Laura noticed how Spencer had adapted to using one arm, developing techniques to brace objects against his body when needed, or using his teeth to hold smaller items. A week into their arrangement, as they ate a simple lunch of bread and cheese, Laura finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Do you still have the ranch? Yes. Matthew's running it for now. Why are you here then? Working for me instead of tending your horses? Spencer set down his bread, considering his answer. When I lost my arm, I convinced myself I couldn't do many things anymore. Blacksmithing was one of them. He glanced around the forge. Working here? It's helping me remember what I can do, not just what I can't. Laura studied him. And what about us? What do you want from me now, Spencer? The chance to know you, he replied simply. Not through letters, but in person. The real you, not the image I created in my mind. He met her gaze steadily. And the chance to let you know the real me, not the idealized man who wrote those letters, nor the broken man who sent his brother in his place. Just me. Laura then grinned. I think I'd like that. The next morning, when Spencer arrived, Laura handed him a leather apron of his own. Their second week working together brought an unexpected visitor. Clara Parker, a slender woman in a practical riding dress, arrived leading a magnificent chestnut mare with an obvious limp. Sheriff Brooks said the new blacksmith might help, she explained, eyeing Laura with cautious hope. My husband says we should put her down, but her voice trailed off as she stroked the horse's neck. Laura examined the mare's hoof carefully. There's a stone bruise and possibly an abscess forming. She glanced up at Clara. We can treat this. There is no need for such drastic measures. As Laura prepared her tools, Clara noticed Spencer working the bellows. Her eyes noticed his pinned sleeve, but she said nothing. While Laura tended the mare's hoof, draining the abscess with practiced precision, Clara watched with interest. You're very good at this, she observed. My father taught me everything he knew, Laura replied, carefully packing the wound with a poultice. I've been doing this work since I was 12 years old. I never thought I'd see a lady blacksmith, Clara admitted. But I suppose there's no reason a woman can't do it as well as a man. No reason at all, Spencer interjected quietly from his position at the bellows. Miss Sullivan is the finest smith I've ever known. Clara's gaze shifted between them, assessing. Well, I'm glad Maple Ridge has found itself such a capable blacksmith, regardless of whether they wear trousers or skirts. She hesitated. My husband manages the largest cattle operation in the county. He's particular about who shoes his horses, but if you can fix Penny here, I'll make sure he gives you a chance with the rest of our stock. After Clara left, promising to return in a few days to check on her mare, Laura turned to Spencer. The finest smith you've ever known?" A hint of color touched Spencer's cheeks. "It's the truth." Laura grinned. "Well, Mr. Hewitt, you're not such a bad assistant yourself." It was the first genuine compliment they'd exchanged since she'd arrived in Maple Ridge. Something shifted between them that afternoon. There was a small but significant thawing of the ice that had formed around Laura's heart. The Parker mare recovered beautifully under Laura's care, and true to her word, Clara brought her husband to the forge the following week. Mr. Parker was a large, imposing man with little patience for pleasantries, but he couldn't argue with the quality of Laura's work on his wife's prized mare. "I've got 30 horses that need attention before the cattle drive next month," he stated gruffly. "Can you handle that kind of work?" Laura didn't flinch under his scrutiny. "Yes, sir, though I'll need to hire additional help for a job that size." "Your one-armed assistant won't be enough?" Parker asked, glancing at Spencer. Spencer stiffened, but Laura answered before he could. "Mr. Hewitt is worth any 2 men I've worked with," she said firmly. "But even with his assistance, we'll need another pair of hands for a contract of that size." Parker studied them both. "Fair enough. I'll send the first batch tomorrow." He turned to leave, then paused. "My wife says you're a woman of uncommon skill, Miss Sullivan. I don't much care what you are, long as my horses are well shod." After he left, Laura caught Spencer's expression. There was a bit of surprise and maybe some admiration in it. "You didn't have to defend me," he said quietly. "I only spoke the truth," Laura replied, returning to her work. "Now, we need to find someone else to help with the Parker contract. Any suggestions?" Spencer considered for a moment. "There's a young man who works at the livery, Billy Johnson. He's been wanting to learn smithing. He is 16, has a strong back, and is good with horses." "Perfect," Laura approved. "Can you speak to him tomorrow?" "Already giving me orders?" Spencer asked, but his tone was light, almost teasing. Laura glanced up, catching the hint of a smile on his face. "Consider it a partnership proposal, Mr. Hewitt, for the Parker contract." "In that case," Spencer replied, "I accept. Miss Sullivan." Young Billy Johnson proved to be an eager apprentice, soaking up Laura's instructions like a sponge. With the extra help, they managed the Parker contract efficiently, and word of the female blacksmith's skill spread quickly through the county. Business flourished, and Laura found herself with more work than she'd ever had in Missouri. The busy days left little time for dwelling on the past. Laura and Spencer fell into a comfortable routine, and their initial awkwardness was gradually replaced by a growing camaraderie. They rarely spoke of personal matters, focusing instead on the work at hand, but Laura couldn't help noticing the changes in Spencer as the weeks passed. He stood taller now, the perpetual crease between his brows fading. He'd developed ingenious methods to compensate for his missing arm, often anticipating Laura's needs before she voiced them. Occasionally she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her insides tingle, but he always looked away when their eyes met. One evening, as they were closing up the shop after Billy had gone home, Spencer cleared his throat nervously. "There's a social at the church this Saturday," he said, eyes fixed on the tool he was cleaning. "Music, dancing, and food. The whole town will be there." Laura wiped her hands on her apron. "Is that so? I thought... That is, if you'd like, perhaps we could attend. Together?" The words came out in a rush. Laura stared at him, momentarily speechless. This was the first time either of them had suggested any interaction outside the forge. Spencer's face reddened. "Of course, you probably wouldn't want to." "Yes," Laura interrupted. "I'd like that." His head jerked up, surprise evident in his expression. "Really?" Laura was suddenly feeling shy. "I haven't been to a social since before my father died. It might be nice." Spencer's smile transformed his face, erasing years of worry in an instant. "I'll call for you at 6 then." As he left, Laura realized she was smiling too. Her first since arriving in California. Saturday evening found Laura standing before the small mirror in her living quarters. She hardly recognized the woman reflecting back at her. She'd unpacked the one good dress she'd brought from Missouri, which was a deep blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. With her hair freed from its usual practical bun and arranged in soft waves around her shoulders, she looked more like the young woman she'd been before the war than the hardened blacksmith she'd become. A knock at the door sent a flutter of nerves through her stomach. She opened it to find Spencer waiting, dressed in a clean black suit, his hair neatly combed. He stared at her, his expression softening. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Laura felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself. Spencer offered his left arm, and after moments' hesitation, Laura placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. They walked to the church without speaking a word. The evening air was warm and fragrant, filled with the scent of late spring blossoms. The social was already in full swing when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the churchyard, casting a golden glow over the gathering. A small band played lively tunes while couples danced on a wooden platform erected for the occasion. Tables laden with food lined one side of the yard, and the entire community seemed to be in attendance. Their entrance caused a brief lull in conversation as curious eyes turned their way. Laura felt Spencer tense beside her, but before either could react, Clara Parker approached. "Miss Sullivan, Mr. Hewitt, I'm so glad you could join us." She linked arms with Laura, smoothly separating her from Spencer. "You must meet everyone properly. You've been in town for nearly a month, and all anyone knows about you is that you're a marvel with iron." Clara led Laura through the crowd, making introductions to what seemed like every family in Maple Ridge. The initial wariness Laura encountered quickly gave way to genuine welcome, as Clara made sure to mention how Laura had saved her prize mare and secured the Parker contract. Meanwhile, Spencer found himself cornered by Sheriff Brooks and several other men, drawn into a discussion about the upcoming cattle drive and the condition of the northern trails. He kept glancing toward Laura, watching as she navigated the social interactions with unexpected grace. When the band struck up a waltz, the crowd parted for the dancers. Laura stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the couples whirl across the platform when Spencer appeared at her side. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, his voice low. Laura hesitated. "I haven't danced in years, and I'm not sure how—" She glanced at his missing arm. "I've learned a few things since Appomattox," Spencer said with a small smile. "If you're willing to try." "I'm willing." Laura allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. He positioned her left hand on his shoulder, took her right hand in his left, and began to guide her through the steps. It was unorthodox, but they quickly found their rhythm, adapting the traditional hold to accommodate their circumstances. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Hewitt," Laura said as they turned smoothly around the floor. "As are you, Miss Sullivan," he replied. "I never expected to see you in a dress." "Do you disapprove?" "Quite the contrary, though I must admit I've grown rather fond of the blacksmith's apron as well." Laura laughed, the sound carrying across the dance floor. Several heads turned in surprise at the musical sound coming from the serious blacksmith they'd come to know. As the evening progressed, Laura found herself genuinely enjoying the company of her new neighbors. The women, initially standoffish, warmed to her after Clara's enthusiastic endorsement. The men, many of whom had already brought work to her forge, treated her with the respect accorded to a skilled tradesperson regardless of gender. Under the starlit sky, with the music playing and Spencer's steady presence beside her, Laura felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt a sense of belonging. Later, as Spencer walked her home, they strolled at a more leisurely pace, neither eager for the evening to end. "Thank you for asking me to the dance," Laura said softly. "I enjoyed tonight more than I expected to." "As did I," Spencer replied. "It's been a long time since I attended a social. Before the war, Matthew and I would compete for dances with the prettiest girls." His voice took on a wistful quality. "Everything was simpler then." "Do you regret it?" Laura asked, "going to war?" Spencer was silent for a moment. "I regret the waste of it all. The lives lost, and the families torn apart. But I believed in the cause, in preserving the Union and ending slavery." He glanced at his empty sleeve. "This seems a small price compared to what many paid." They had reached the door to Laura's quarters. She turned to face him, studying his features in the moonlight. "The man who wrote those letters is still there," she said quietly. "I see him more clearly every day." Spencer's expression softened. "And the woman who replied? The one I dreamed about for 5 years. She's even more remarkable in person than on paper." He leaned forward, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Laura met him halfway, their lips touching in a gentle, tentative kiss that ended all too quickly. "Good night, Laura," Spencer whispered. "Good night, Spencer," she replied, her voice equally soft. As she closed the door behind her, Laura touched her lips. Outside, Spencer stood motionless for a moment before turning toward home, his steps lighter than they had been in years. 3 weeks later, Laura and Spencer had settled into a rhythm at the forge. Business was steady, with even the initially skeptical Sheriff Brooks bringing in his horse for new shoes. Laura's skill impressed the townspeople, and Spencer's presence helped ease the transition for the more traditional customers who were uncomfortable dealing directly with a female blacksmith. One evening, as they were cleaning up for the day, Matthew Hewitt burst through the door. "Spencer, there's a fire at the ranch. The stable's burning and the horses are trapped." It took almost an hour to get to the ranch. When they finally arrived, they found the stable engulfed in flames. Panicked whinnies came from inside, where a dozen valuable horses were stabled. "The hands are trying to control the spread," Matthew shouted over the roar of the fire. "But the horses—" Without hesitation, Laura and Spencer ran toward the burning building. The main door was blocked by fallen timber, but Spencer pointed to a side entrance. "We can get in through there." Inside, the smoke was suffocating. Laura pulled her bandana over her nose and mouth, seeing Spencer do the same. The horses were frantic, kicking at their stalls and rearing in terror. "You take that side," Laura shouted, pointing to the left row of stalls. Working swiftly, they moved from stall to stall, opening gates and guiding terrified horses toward the side door. The heat was intense, and falling embers threatened to ignite their clothing. Laura managed to free 5 horses, but one young stallion refused to move, paralyzed with fear. "He won't budge," she called to Spencer, who had successfully evacuated his side of the stable. Spencer rushed to her side. Without speaking, they coordinated their approach. Laura stood at the horse's head, trying to speak soothingly despite her own fear, while Spencer moved to the animal's flank. Using his weight and his one arm, he pushed against the horse while Laura pulled from the front. Suddenly, a burning beam crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. The stallion bolted forward, nearly trampling Laura as it charged for the exit. Spencer grabbed her with his one arm, pulling her against him as the horse thundered past. "That's all of them," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "We need to get out now." They stumbled toward the door, supporting each other through the smoke and heat. Just as they reached the exit, another beam gave way above them. Spencer saw it falling and shoved Laura through the doorway, the momentum carrying him forward as well, just as the beam crashed to the ground where they had just stood. Outside, they collapsed to the ground, coughing and gulping for fresh air. Ranch hands were managing to control the fire now that the immediate concern for the horses was past. Matthew rushed to their side with canteens of water. "You two are either the bravest or the most foolish people I've ever seen," he said, but his voice was filled with admiration. Laura looked at Spencer, his face blackened with soot, his one arm scraped and burned in places, the arm that had pulled her to safety. He met her gaze, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. "We got them all out," Spencer said simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Yes," Laura replied, reaching for his hand. "We did it together." The stable fire marked a turning point. As they worked side by side in the forge the following days, the last barriers between them began to fall. Spencer spoke openly about his experiences in the war and about the dark days after losing his arm when he believed his life was effectively over. Laura shared her struggles running her father's forge in Missouri, where she faced daily prejudice and skepticism simply because she was a woman. "I used to think we were so different," Laura said one evening as they sat on the porch behind the blacksmith shop watching the sunset. "A soldier and a blacksmith, a man and a woman. But we've both been fighting to be seen for who we are, not for what others think we should be." Spencer allowed his shoulder to touch hers as they sat together. "In my letters, I could be the man I wanted to be, whole and confident. I was afraid when you saw the real me, you'd be disappointed." "The man in the letters was part of you," Laura said softly. "But this man?" She placed her hand over his. "This is the one who ran into a burning stable without hesitation, who's worked alongside me these past weeks without complaint, and who's found ways to do everything he needs to do despite what he's lost. He's even better than the man in the letters." Spencer turned to her, his expression vulnerable. "Do you really believe that?" In answer, Laura leaned forward and kissed him gently. "I wouldn't have fallen in love with the real you if I didn't." A month later, Laura looked up from her work to find Spencer standing before her, something hidden in his closed fist. "I have a proposition," he said, his voice serious. "I'm listening," Laura replied, setting aside her hammer. "The ranch needs a blacksmith. The town needs a blacksmith. I propose a merger of our businesses." He opened his hand to reveal 2 small iron rings, clearly freshly forged. "And of our lives." Laura took one of the rings and examined its fine craftsmanship. "When did you make these?" "At night, after you'd gone to bed," Spencer admitted. "It took some time with one arm, but I managed." "They're beautiful," she whispered. "I love you, Laura Sullivan," Spencer said, dropping to one knee before her. "Not the idealized woman from the letters, but the real woman who stands before me. You are strong, determined, and far more forgiving than I deserve. Will you marry me?" Laura took his face in her hands. "On one condition." "Name it." "We remake these rings together, side by side at the forge, a symbol of what we can create together." Spencer smiled. "I can think of nothing more fitting." The following evening, after the day's work was complete, Laura and Spencer stood together at the forge. They had chosen to reshape the rings Spencer had made, combining their skills to create something new. "My father taught me that the strongest iron is folded and reforged many times," Laura said, placing the first ring in the fire. "Each time it goes through the flame, it comes out stronger than before." Spencer looked up from working the bellows. "Just like us." When the metal glowed cherry red, Laura removed it with tongs and placed it on the anvil. Together, they hammered it into a new shape. Laura guided the tongs while Spencer wielded the hammer. They worked in perfect harmony, their movements synchronized like dancers. As they crafted their rings, Laura thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a brief encounter during war to years of letters to heartbreak and betrayal, and finally to this moment of creation and commitment. "I think we've been forged by fire too," she said softly as they polished the finished rings. "The war, my father's death, and your injury, all of it shaped us, made us who we are." "And brought us together," Spencer added, taking her hand in his. The rings were simple but beautiful, bands of dark iron with a subtle pattern created by the folding and hammering process. Unlike gold or silver, they would never bend or break. Like the love they symbolized, they had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The wedding took place 3 weeks later at the town church, with nearly the entire Maple Ridge community there for the occasion, along with some of Laura's former Missouri customers who had traveled by train in response to her invitation. Laura wore a simple blue dress, her blacksmith's hands cleaned but still bearing the marks of her trade. Spencer stood tall in a new suit, his empty sleeve pinned neatly at his shoulder. It was no longer a symbol of shame, but simply a part of who he was. Sheriff Brooks, who had become one of their most loyal customers, led Laura down the aisle in place of her father. When the time came to exchange rings, Laura and Spencer proudly placed their jointly crafted bands on each other's fingers. They were simple iron circles that had been heated, hammered, and shaped by both of them, then polished to a soft luster that caught the light from the church windows. "These rings," said the minister, "forged in fire and fashioned with love, represent the unbreakable bond between husband and wife. Like the metal from which they're made, this union is strong yet adaptive, forged in the heat of challenge but made more beautiful for having endured the flame." After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the Hewitt Ranch, where the newly rebuilt stable stood as a testament to resilience and new beginnings. The blacksmith shop in town would remain open, with Laura and Spencer splitting their time between it and the ranch, combining their skills to serve both the townspeople and the neighboring ranchers. As twilight fell, Spencer led Laura away from the crowd to the small forge he'd built behind the ranch house. "This is my wedding gift to you," he said, showing her the compact but well-designed workspace. "So you never have to choose between being a wife and being a blacksmith." Laura touched the anvil, already feeling at home. "And so you never forget that you're still the blacksmith you were before the war, just with new techniques to learn." Spencer lit the forge, and together they watched the fire catch and grow, the orange glow illuminating their faces and the matching rings on their hands. "Fire changes things," Laura said softly. "It can destroy, but it also creates. It reveals the true strength of what it touches." Spencer wrapped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Then I'm grateful for every fire we've faced. The war, the distance, and even the stable fire. They've all led us here, to the strongest, truest thing I've ever known." "Our love," Laura whispered. "Our love," Spencer agreed. Under the star-filled California sky, they sealed their vow with a kiss, the gentle hiss of the forge fire a fitting soundtrack to the beginning of their life together. A blacksmith and a soldier, each bearing scars, each strengthened by adversity, and together, finally whole.